As a political deadlock here in Israel continues, interim Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has held an emergency cabinet meeting saying Israel's security policy toward Gaza has not changed. Our correspondent is standing by in Jerusalem to bring you the latest. Wild protests continue in Iran with fuel prices dramatically hiked up and amounts rationed, leaving a number of people dead, with the death toll continuing to rise. And chaotic demonstrations are ongoing in Hong Kong, with a masked demonstrator reportedly responsible for shooting a police officer with an arrow. We'll have the details. I'm Sarah Coates. Thanks for joining me. We begin with the political turmoil here in Israel, with the Likud party holding an emergency meeting with the right-wing bloc, with interim Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu congratulating Israel's security forces for their work over the last week during a dangerous flare-up with Palestinian Islamic Jihad after Israel ordered a targeted killing of one of its commanders. The terror group responding, launching hundreds of rockets into Israel.
The goals of the operation have been fully achieved, and I want to clarify again, Israel has not obliged itself to anything. Our security policy has not changed, not even slightly. We maintain our full freedom of action, and we will harm anyone who tries to harm us.
And our senior correspondent, Owen Alterman, is standing by for us in Jerusalem. Owen, thank you so much for joining me. Tell me, what more do we know about this meeting? What else has come out of it so far?
Well, Sarah, listen, we heard what Benjamin Netanyahu had to say about the recent military operation. Obviously, he's going to be facing pressure from residents of the South who endured days of rocket barrages that closed schools, that shuttered the economy, without, again, a clear result on the Gaza front. This is something that people in the South and people here in Israel in general are used to. It's been an Achilles heel for Prime Minister Netanyahu throughout the course of his time in office and throughout the course of election campaigns. But I think Netanyahu will be happy to try to move on and try to make headlines on other fronts, including on the political front. As you mentioned, Sarah, in your lead, importantly, Benjamin Netanyahu is putting the squeeze on Benny Gantz in these waning days of Gantz holding the mandate to form a government. There are two ways that Gantz can form a government without Netanyahu. One, a minority government in which the joint Arab list politicians, who largely represent Israel's Arab sector, support the government from the outside and are in some ways partners to the government. And the second is by defections from inside Benjamin Netanyahu's Likud party or within his wider right-wing bloc. On the first, Netanyahu really trying to put the squeeze on Gantz last night with yet another video saying how untenable he thinks it would be for three former heads of the Israeli military, who are part of the four-person leadership of Blue and White, to partner with the joint Arab list, some of whose politicians have called IDF soldiers war criminals. So Netanyahu really trying to increase the political costs for Blue and White of going with that option. And on that second front of trying to forestall defections from the Likud or from the right-wing bloc, as you mentioned, Netanyahu holding a meeting of the leaders of the right-wing factions. And tomorrow, 2:30 in the afternoon at the Israeli parliament, planning on holding a meeting of all 55 legislators from all the parties of the right-wing bloc. Sarah, he's trying to get each of those individual legislators essentially on the record in these closing days of haggling to form a coalition, basically saying that he or she won't defect. The reality, Sarah, is in both counts, on a minority government with the Arab list support from the outside and on defections from the right-wing bloc, Netanyahu can't ultimately control the result. If Gantz wants to do a deal with the joint Arab list and Avigdor Lieberman of the Israel Beitenu party wants to do it too, there's nothing really Netanyahu can directly do to stand in the way. Same thing with defections from the right-wing bloc. Netanyahu ultimately can't stop his legislators from doing that if they want to, but he can try to change the incentives, can try to raise the political costs, and that's exactly what he's doing.
Certainly a number of scenarios Israel is facing there. Owen Alterman in Jerusalem, thank you so much for the update. Now, the killing of a senior Islamic Jihad commander in Gaza has once again raised the issue of Israel's use of targeted killings. Now, the method has been used periodically by Israeli intelligence agencies. The killing of Baha Abu-Atta on Tuesday marks the first time since 2012 that a high-profile terrorist was assassinated by Israel in Gaza. But does it deter Israel's enemies? Our Yotam Confino has the story.
Israel's intelligence agencies, famous for being the long arm of the State of Israel and feared by its enemies, working in the shadows deep behind enemy lines. 3 former Israeli intelligence chiefs agreed to discuss the methods used by the agencies to fight Israel's enemies. This is the story of targeted killings. Israel has a long history of assassinating its enemies. Senior Islamic Jihad commander Baha Abu-Atta is the latest name added to the list. The Islamic Jihad responding by firing hundreds of rockets at Israeli cities. Despite the often aggressive response to targeted killings, high-profile Israeli politicians support the method. The Mossad and Israel's military intelligence have played a crucial role in these operations abroad and at home. And Mossad chief Yossi Cohen says there's no hesitation in assassinating Hamas officials abroad. But is it effective, or does it make the situation worse?
There are people, experts, that claim that it does not help, but I think the contrary. I think that it helps not to the fact that once the Americans killed al-Baghdadi, ISIS will disappear. ISIS will not disappear, but ISIS will be weakened. And I think that it deters because those leaders, they do not intend to die.
Yatom headed the Mossad in 1997 when a failed assassination attempt on Hamas leader Khalid Mashal in Jordan caused a major crisis between Israel and its neighbor. He eventually resigned, and his successor, Ephraim Halevi, was among those sent to sort things out with the late King Hussein of Jordan. Halevi believes assassinating Hamas leaders isn't just ineffective, it's a sign of weakness.
We don't need 2 million unemployed people on our hands in the Gaza Strip as a result of the fact that we will decimate the leadership there. But this is not something that people can explain to the public unless you have a leadership which is strong, and not to give the public not only fake news but fake policies.
Halevi's view on targeted killings is shared by the former head of Israel's military intelligence, Shlomo Gassid. In 1975, at the height of Palestinian terrorist attacks, Israel planned on taking out the PLO leadership in Beirut, but Gassid opposed it.
It would have been a great idea to eliminate Israel's enemy at one point. Only it's impossible. And the best you'll get some kind of a delay before it develops again into an enemy.
But what about Israel's other stated enemies, further from home? Mossad chief Yossi Cohen says that even the head of Iran's Revolutionary Guard, Qasem Soleimani, is not off limits. But where does Israel draw the line when it comes to targeted killings?
There is a line which is drawn by our administration. And the line is that we do not cross to the area of targeting heads of states. And this is because of many reasons. But all the others that are subordinated to heads of states, they should not enjoy any immunity.
So somebody like Qasem Soleimani would also be a target?
It means everybody who is in this criteria.
The Mossad and Israeli politicians are openly talking about targeted killings. But is it just a tool used for deterrence, or should Israel's enemies be worried? They will only find out once it's too late.
And we are going out for a short break, but when we come back, violent protests continue in Iran with the death toll rising and dozens of people arrested. We'll tell you what authorities there are threatening demonstrators with right after this. Stay with us.
I'm Michelle McCory on I-24 News. Join me on Clear Cut, where we cut to the chase with a straightforward yet insightful breakdown of the world's top political and economic stories.
Weeknights beginning at 7 p.m. Eastern, only on I-24 News.
I-24 News, the international channel in the heart of the Middle East, now brings you a new view of this troubled region. From I-24 News' acclaimed Arabic language channel, the stories, the people, the passions of the Middle East that you haven't seen before. A weekly roundup of highlights from I-24 News Arabic. Every Sunday, only on I-24 News.
The Holy Land. It has awed and inspired and consoled the faithful for centuries. Holiness is here, in the land, in the light, in the ruins and houses of worship. Let us take you there each week as we uncover the rich and fascinating history of man's search for spirituality in this ancient land. Join me each week for the Holy Land Uncovered.
The stock market is at a record high.
That's money in the bank. Our success is aligned with the success of the world around us.
It's not all glitz and glam here in the City of Angels.
Wow. Down. Here on Capitol Hill, it is an all-out brawl between these candidates.
We need to operate from a place of courage.
Welcome back. Let's move now to the impeachment proceedings against US President Donald Trump, with Jennifer Williams, who's a foreign aide to Vice President Mike Pence, telling lawmakers behind closed doors that the July 25 phone call with his Ukrainian counterpart was inappropriate. A transcript has also been released of an earlier closed-door deposition by a former White House aide, Tim Morrison, who's told lawmakers that he had concerns about Trump's remarks. Now, this is CNN is reporting that senior government official Mark Sandy testified over the weekend, telling officials that close to $400 million in military aid to Ukraine was withheld earlier this year, adding that he didn't know why. More in this report.
He's the first White House staffer to testify in the impeachment inquiry, Mark Sandy of the Office of Management and Budget. Democrats hope Sandy will shed light on the administration's decision to briefly withhold $400 million in military aid to Ukraine, allegedly as leverage to get Ukraine to investigate the president's political rivals. Friday night, David Holmes, an embassy staffer in Ukraine, testified for 6 hours behind closed doors. In his opening statement obtained by ABC News, Holmes said he overheard a phone call between the president and Ambassador Gordon Sondland, and that Sondland later told Holmes Trump didn't care about Ukraine, quote, the president only cares about, quote, big stuff that benefits the president, like the Biden investigation. Earlier in the day, the former U.S. ambassador to Ukraine testified that she was the victim of a smear campaign spearheaded by the president's lawyer, Rudy Giuliani.
I do not understand Mr. Giuliani's motives for attacking me.
While she was on the stand, President Trump lashed out, tweeting, everywhere Marie Yovanovitch went turned bad. She started off in Somalia. How'd that go?
I actually think that where I've served over the years, I and others have demonstrably made things better.
Republicans distanced themselves from the president's tweets, but repeatedly suggested her ouster is not an impeachable offense.
Nothing in that room today and nothing in that room earlier this week, nothing rises to the level of impeachable offenses.
3 more days of public hearings are scheduled for next week.
Now, all of this as America's long presidential election campaign continues. Our senior Washington correspondent Dan Raviv reports on how the impeachment timetable may affect the campaign.
If, as expected, the House of Representatives votes to impeach Donald Trump, only a majority vote would be required, and that could happen next month. The president would then go on trial in the Senate, only the third time in history that has happened. The trial may well dominate politics and the media for all of January and February, a problem for 6 of the Democrats running for president because they are United States senators. Bernie Sanders, Elizabeth Warren, Michael Bennet, Cory Booker, Amy Klobuchar, and Kamala Harris would certainly feel they have to carry out their duty as jurors hearing the case against the president. In fact, Trump's strategy might include having his lawyers draw out the process, hoping to distract the Democrats running for the White House and to underline the Trump message that the opposition party is accomplishing nothing, only pursuing what he calls a witch hunt. Meantime, an 18th Democrat has joined the race, former Massachusetts Governor Deval Patrick, hoping to become only the 2nd African-American to serve as President of the United States.
This time is about the character of the country. This time is about whether the day after the election, America will keep her promises. This time is about more than removing an unpopular and divisive leader, as important as that is, but about delivering instead for you.
Patrick said you don't know whether you can break through in a crowded field of candidates unless you try. A former New York City mayor, billionaire Michael Bloomberg, is also joining the race relatively late, filing to add his name to the Democratic Party primary ballot in Alabama and Arkansas so far. Dan Raviv, I-24 News, Washington.
Meanwhile, President Trump's been dealt another blow to his 2020 campaign, with Conservative Democrat John Bel Edwards winning a second term in office in Louisiana following a tight race against his Republican opponent with a 51 to 49% margin. Now, since Edwards has been in the top job, Louisiana has seen 21,000 more jobs created and unemployment rates drop from 6% down to 4%. In Iran, authorities are clamping down on public unrest as protests over gasoline rationing and price hikes have turned fatal, with varying reports on the number of those killed, with 40 people reportedly arrested. Now, state media is also reporting that a policeman's been killed in clashes with protesters. Now, these demonstrations erupting in at least 37 cities across the Islamic Republic after Tehran imposed petrol rationing and raised pump prices by at least 50% on Friday, with Supreme Leader Ayatollah Khamenei supporting the move, calling the demonstrators bandits. Now, the protests have put renewed pressure on Iran's government as it struggles to overcome crippling US sanctions.
Various cameras across the city are recording video, and also cameras inside the crowds are recording, and ultimately, after accurate identification of these people, they will be definitely addressed in due time.
Upcoming military drills planned for the next few days between the United States and North Korea have been put on ice as the two countries look to restart stalled peace talks. US Defense Secretary Mark Esper says despite the move, the armies from both sides will remain on high alert, adding, "I don't see this as a concession. I see this as a good faith effort to enable peace." Now, this is North Korea's state media is reporting that nuclear issues will not be on the table when talks with the US resume unless the US's hostile policy is put on the agenda. Fresh clashes have erupted in Hong Kong, with massive fires breaking out at a university and a police media liaison reportedly hit in the leg by an arrow today as pro-democracy demonstrators continue to protest, throwing petrol bombs and other weapons at police as authorities respond with tear gas and other riot dispersal means. Protests have been ongoing now for more than 5 months, originally over an extradition bill to mainland China, with no sign of the protests letting up anytime soon. The death toll continues to mount in Bolivia following the resignation of Evo Morales a week after the October 20 election was shown to be rigged. Now, clashes have been continuing between cocoa farmers, many of those who were loyal to Morales, and security forces who were behind the push to oust him, with 9 people killed on Saturday alone. The United Nations weighing in, saying that the violence must come to an end to make way for free and transparent elections.
We remind the authorities of their obligation to respect the rights of freedom of expression and peaceful assembly, and to distinguish between violent actors and peaceful demonstrators. We call on all actors, including political leaders and their followers, to exercise restraint in order to reduce tensions and to urgently engage in a genuine and meaningful dialogue to address political disagreement. Otherwise, there is a serious risk the situation will spiral out of control.
There's also continued unrest in Venezuela, with opposition leader Juan Guaido calling on his supporters during a rally in Caracas to kick off a new wave of protests against President Nicolas Maduro, who had been able to hold on to power despite heavy US sanctions and an economic crisis in the country.
This doesn't stay here. We now have an agenda, political, social, dignitary, preventative, around only one thing, that the dictator goes away and we have free presidential elections. On Monday at 9 a.m. at your workplaces, in your neighborhood, in your complexes, everyone get out on the street and protest for your problems, for Venezuela, all together.
New York lawmakers introduced more than 50 pieces of legislation last session that would grant benefits to undocumented immigrants living in the state. In part 3 of our series Undocumented, our partner at News 12's Nadia Galindo highlights one law taking effect next month that's stirring up controversy.
It's something many people take for granted on a daily basis. Driving to work and driving home. If you're licensed and insured, you probably don't think twice about it. But if you're not and undocumented, driving can turn your world upside down.
Right now, I can't get a driver's license or anything.
And that's because Doris Sorto Hernandez is a Salvadoran national living in Port Chester undocumented.
I'm scared. If the police pull me over, they could detain me.
That would mean leaving behind Sean, her 6-year-old son, who has spina bifida.
Hi.
A debilitating birth defect requiring around-the-clock care.
4 times a day, you have to change Sean's catheter. He takes medicine, 2 medicines every day.
His condition makes getting from place to place much more difficult.
I have to figure out who will take me, or I'll have to pay for a taxi, and it's expensive.
A reason Doris has been an outspoken advocate for the Green Light Bill to give 250,000 undocumented immigrants in New York the right to obtain driver's licenses.
Driving without a driver's license in a state where you are not able to have a driver's license as an undocumented immigrant is the #1 way to pipeline you into deportation proceedings.
It's preventing hardworking people from being able to go to work, to take their kids to school, to go to doctor's appointments.
Advocates say the legislation will make the roads safer by reducing the number of uninsured drivers and will also boost the state's economy with millions coming in for license fees. The Democratic-controlled state assembly.
A rare sign of mutual respect and admiration between fighters from Iran and Israel happening in an MMA contest in Sweden yesterday, with Israeli fighter Moshe Ben Shimol and Iranian Raz Madadi embracing on the mat following a draw. Now, it's common to see sporting events between Israel and Iran boycotted due to the ongoing tension between the two countries. And Moshe joins me from Sweden via Skype. Thank you so much for coming on with us today, Moshe. This really is a rare sight between Israelis and Iranians. Tell me about the fight, how it went, and what the feeling was like when you both finished in a draw.
The feeling was great. Maybe it will sound weird, but for me, the result in this match, in this fight, was less important than the message itself. I believe Raza also. So draw it's the best for two of us. It's like two of us win, and we get the chance to make here some history. So I believe both of us are very happy. Reza is a great guy. he wanted to do this fight. He made a connection with us. And after the fight, he treated us like kings over here. So we are very happy to be here and very happy to get the chance to make some history.
We're nearly out of time, but just quite briefly, tell me, do you believe this could now be a sign of things to come, you know, really bridging the divide between Iranian and Israeli sports people?
Yeah, I believe so, because as I said to a lot of people, to a lot of channels that spoke with me, big things start with small ones. So I believe that this will be the beginning. Maybe this is not going to bring, I don't want to sound too optimistic, it's not going to bring like peace to the world, but make some changes and we get the opportunity to
Moshe, we're nearly out of time, but massive congratulations, and that's all we have time for. Thanks for watching.